I think our brokenness most often is done in the context of relationship. And so it's a wound in that interpersonal space, but I can be healed outside of that interpersonal space. I don't think so. I think restoration happens again in the context of relationship. Our healing happens in the context of relationship, because fractured relationship is the thing that most oftentimes again has set things crooked.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode with Proven Men's Podcast. Today I'm being joined by Mike Kunzinger. Mike Kunzinger is the head of a student counseling service at a local university. He oversees a team of counselors, and he's not just a counselor, but also a pastor and a father of 3 sons. So looking forward to having him on today, and here we go. Mike.
How are you? Hey, doing good.
Cool.
I'm doing well.
Very cool. Thank you for joining us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's definitely an honor.
Yeah, totally.
I appreciate it, for sure. Yeah.
Today we want to talk about some of the issues with marriage, singleness, sexuality, how that works, maybe it's some trauma. Cool to just jump right in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So something we often run into is with married couples, them just trying to figure out how to do marriage well in the midst of kind of a sexual climate. Even before we get to that, from your perspective, because like Proven Men is like hyper focused, so we kind of always just see the trash, we see the hard.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, how is marriage doing? Is that something big in your world, or is that just a piece?
Yeah, so big in the world of counseling. Yeah, it's big. Marriages are struggling. That's a cultural piece that's there for sure. And I think how our marriage is doing, that depends, I think, is the answer to that. There's things that have come out and research that's been done that says above, I guess the demographic of age is what we take into consideration, that depending on what demographic you look at depends on how well marriage is doing. So 65 and olders, what would be the boomers, not as well. They're not doing as good as actually millennials. So there's research that shows that millennials are doing fairly well in terms of being married, and the up and coming generation Z. So interesting. Research shows that the up and coming folks are doing okay. And a lot of times you hear the stat thrown around, or with this question that about half or the high 40s is the divorce rate. But again, that breaks down into these different pockets and demographics of, I think it's 3.8 or 9 per 1,000 is as far as divorce goes. So the state of marriage, it depends on that, but all in all, I would say not great. We're not doing well, especially if basically half the population is ending in divorce, is in the wake of that, has kids and so forth. That's not a good place to be. And I can say personally, there's friends that I still keep in contact with from high school and some friends from college and so forth, that I could say more than half of those folks that I've been associated with over the years and would call friend and have been in different contexts with, whether it be church or small group or again just hanging out, their marriages have ended in divorce, unfortunately. So that's from a personal perspective, just an observation apart from the broader cultural piece. But it is something that has been a part of my own journey, and coming to in their mid 30s to early 40s, that this seems to be a fracturing point with people I've been associated with. So that's there again on a personal level, and I am seeing more and more in those first couple years of marriage with what would be in that millennial category coming to counseling and having things that they haven't looked at or they were surprised by, or maybe they've been lingering issues, and they in the marriage context they become more acute or more pronounced, and they're not sure what to do, and so they're coming into counseling. And so seeing grad students that are in counseling that are newly married and so forth. So The short of it is, I don't think we're doing very good from what I'm looking at from this chair in particular.
Yeah, I'm constantly struck by how many friends I have. So even like apart from kind of the hyper focus of this job, with the proven ministries world, I'm constantly surprised by how many of my friends have experienced divorce. And most of the time I don't know it, and I get to know them, and like this is like a wound, this is a thing in their background, and I had just no idea. And they're my age, they're like in their 20s, and it's just crazy. Got to figure too, some of the stats that cohabitation is just becoming more prolific, more of a kind of a cultural norm. Marriage isn't as much of a thing. So I imagine that's a piece in the stats as well. I don't know how that would necessarily cash out as far as just trying to figure out how like couples, I don't know, are doing these days when it comes to fidelity and longevity. But I hear you with the marriage thing. I had looked at something similar, and it's like, like the divorce is rising, but like those are people who got married 20, 30 years ago, and so it's not necessarily fair then to just throw it across all demographics and say this is how marriage is doing.
And you're right with that's the other piece, is folks seem to be waiting longer to get married in general, and so that definitely affects marriage, and obviously that brings up questions in terms of why folks are waiting longer to enter into that marriage commitment, so in the institution.
So looking specifically, we'll look at marriages first. Covered how is it doing. What are the kind of salient issues? What are some of the pronounced stuff when you're actually looking with like sexual integrity? Comes to that, is it trauma, is it pornography, or like how to
okay. So I'll throw out three things I think that I think about, and as it relates to the cross pressures, those cultural pressures that are forming and informing, right, the way that we think about marriage, and then us getting into marriage, the things that linger, and I think are just a part of the waters that we swim in as it relates to that institution, that perhaps maybe we're thinking about them, maybe we're not. The first piece that I would speak to is just the Western, as we talk about our context, cultural climate of consumerism and the market. That might be a weird place to start, but I think it's important. And the question that comes out of that is, how does the market and the context that we find ourselves in spending and money and advertisement and that prick to purchase and commodify, we're in an age where most anything, if not everything, can be commodified, something that you can purchase for a price. The question of how has that shaped our desires? How has that shaped our relationship? And particular to marriage, how does that inform how we relate to our partner? And I would propose that wittingly or unwittingly, it very much informs our dating relationships leading up to marriage, and then our marriage. And so how so? I think that of course it's a part of desire and what we desire, and it points us to desire the new, the novel, the best, and to use things in a very particular way. Use them or acquire them until they're obsolete, or you feel like they break down, or they don't have any more utility, or you get bored of them. And at that point, the natural invitation is to discard. And this falls into, we're not going to go into ecological things in this, but I think that is kind of an autopilot, as it were, to where we are as a culture, and we're habituated into at least a thinking style that when things, I don't want them anymore, when I don't like them anymore, when they get worn and tattered and I'm tired, then what's the point? So how much has that bled into our marriage relationships? I can't quantify that, but I think it's something that we need to think about, which is, how does a market-driven culture inform our desires and and our interrelatedness, especially to our spouse? So that's one thing I would just, more than answering that question, hold up, is something that I think it's important that we're conscientious about what that cross pressure in particular is doing to our relationships, and how we think about, because that's a part of pornography, right? We talk about that people being treated as objects and commodities rather than image bearers and humans who have dignity. So I would talk about that, or hold up that piece. The second part, and since the early 2000s, this has been more of a common vernacular than it has prior to that. And there's been some articles I know in the Atlantic covering this and so forth, kind of these cultural writers. And you could speak into this as well, just hookup culture. I think in universities and colleges, if that's the place where people are meeting, and they are meeting and mating, or finding their mate to carry into college, it's providing, I think, the dominant and predominant model for sex and intimacy in many ways. So again, that raises a question: how is what has become to be known as hookup culture informing marriage, if we choose to move beyond and past hooking up, and how that damages us on an emotional, and I would propose a soul level. Maybe I don't need to go into that piece, but I think that's a factor where, again, the question, what is a model for us of doing intimacy well, or alternative pictures of how do I want to engage? And I think the one that is given to us from television, in our context of, we look at our peers, not myself, but younger, like I said, college age, and being in a college context, is I think people are hooking up. That's what I need to do. I feel the pressure. Success, going back to the market-driven thing, I want to have a successful career for males and females. And to do that, I don't know if an attached relationship is the best thing for meeting that goal. So again, that's elongating. When I get married, I'm going to get married later on because I have these success goals that need to be met, but I also have these needs for a relationship, and I can get them met to some extent with a hookup. And hookup is going to be defined in different ways by different people. That doesn't necessarily mean sex, but although that's a part of it. So how is, just the question I pose it again, how is the market, how is hookup culture informing the way that we live into and live out marriage, if we were involved in that prior? But again, I think it's a monolithic, I think it's a primary model that is being peddled to adolescents, late teens, adolescents, young adulthood, and something to stop and say, well, what are the other models, and is this good and right, and does it promote flourishing? Because I think that's our goal, and I would say no, not at all. I guess one other point to this is what Proven Men is doing, is just the ubiquitous nature of pornography. Again, in that, how is that shaping our desire? How is that shaping the way we think and embody intimacy? And again, why isn't the institution of marriage doing well? Not to be reductionistic, but I would put forth these three pieces as pieces to consider, not the only pieces, maybe not even primary, but they are, I truly believe, big aspects to, again, that transitional space, and then being in marriage. How are we approaching those relationships? And I don't think those three spheres do a good job of setting us up well for marriage, or models of intimacy. What is it when I get into marriage? What does it look like to do a relationship well? And those don't inform that process, I would say, very well. Quite to the contrary.
Thanks, man. Those are helpful. What I see you painting is a series of cascading backgrounds, right? And those are then kind of you got the kind of the novelty, right? This addiction to novelty, and that like all of our culture is framed by novelty. And then like down below it, then you've got like the story of intimacy, hookup culture, and then like how that plays out in institution, right? And then all of a sudden somebody finds himself in that story, right? And those are the narratives then that they have to navigate as they're trying to figure out what does intimacy look like, relationships, and it doesn't help that narrative plays to our, like, just base desires, you know, when it comes to just like wanting to have sex, and then all of a sudden the culture is like, yeah, you have permission to do that with as many people as you want.
Yeah, whenever you want.
Yeah.
That sexual liberation is the answer to our intimacy struggles or problems. I don't think that's working.
Yeah.
So,
so you see a lot of brokenness from these things. They're real issues. How do you, like, personally, how do you engage them as a counselor? Like, what are some of the tools, resources, whatever, or just relational avenues? Like, how do you sit down with people in these spaces, and what do you do?
Yeah, and you alluded to one of those things is letting their story speak, letting them voice and bring to the table what we might say their own models for making life work. We all have an idea, and we all engage in our world and look to make meaning in our world in particular ways that we think is going to bring about and optimize our own happiness, again, our own potentially wholeness, our own flourishing, and be able to keep our relationships intact and build on those relationships and be seen and loved and delighted in those basic things. So we're all fumbling around in this world, looking to get our longings met, and one of those primary longings is for intimacy and to be connected one to another in good and right ways. And so what I'm seeing is that people, folks, students, etc., that are trying to find meaning in the face of things going awry or things not going well, and so it's pricked. They're crossing the threshold of the door because something hasn't gone right. There's some kind of dissonance in them, and they don't know how to reconcile either their own value structure with what they're feeling, or vice versa, or they're experiencing things such as anxiety and depression at a level that haven't been present before, and they don't know how to make meaning out of that. And so back to that piece is letting them talk through and open up those places in them where this is what I've tried. Do I keep trying this? Do I keep approaching my world in these particular ways that I hope will work, but they're just not. And I don't. I thought I had the skills to and the resilience to engage and procure what I want and what I long for. However, it's not happening. And so the first part is to understand them, to understand their own pain, their own places of friction or dissonance, and again, letting them speak from, they understand their lives better than I do, because a lot of times I'm meeting them for the first time, and making that space. And I think that's hearing them in terms of where they haven't felt loved well, and how they've perhaps perpetuated dysfunction in their own lives and their own victimizations and so forth. Hearing that, and part of my responsibility is making a safe space, a contained space for them to explore without repercussions, without consequence that could affect their life in ways that wouldn't be helpful. And so to not do them any harm in that space, and for them to know that they can be open, they can be transparent, they can try on different hats and different shoes, try on different things, to ask themselves, okay, what will work, or what do I need to move into, or do I need to be invited to move into, that will help make meaning of things that seem meaningless, and help make things not work, but to get out of this place and to find more of a place of homeostasis than I'm currently in, or crisis. This is a crisis. We have crisis of identity. We have crisis of meaning, which is similar. We have crisis of experience, and these existential pieces that come up in all of us, a place to be able to flush that out and enact new ways of being, of interacting, of relating with that person sitting across from you that I've never had the space or permission to do before. And so there is that piece that we talk a lot about of walking alongside and their story and their journey, and also stepping in front and having and inviting them to consider the steps along the path and what step ought they to take or step into to find that sense of wholeness and kind of land the plane rather than circling in potential confusion. So that's what I think we can do. What I do is create that space, hopefully, build that relationship, and ask questions that help them examine their own life, so it's worth living. And a lot of times we come in and we're confused and unsure, and we need a space to examine our life and ask those questions, as we've talked about. What is true, good, and beautiful? And what do I want to appropriate into my life? And what do I need to take out? What do I need to put off, as it were, that I've been carrying, that has been with me? And what does relating well look like, and how have I been doing that? So those are some pieces, and I think some of the broader questions. Is where do we get stuck, and where do we need to be unstuck? And so just walking with people and being attentive to them, being attuned to their own longings, and can we move in that direction to where those are met in good, right, and proper ways. So those are some of the conversation and some of the processing, apart from going into counseling technique proper or modalities. I think hearing their story, giving them an opportunity to re-story in the ways that and be restored in the ways that they desire, and it's good for them in where they are, rather than superimposing where I think they ought to be. Those are some.
That's helpful.
Pieces.
Yeah, I think that's probably a helpful lens for a lot of our viewers, because it's not just that they're struggling with it, but people that they know are.
Yeah.
Right. It is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I imagine this wouldn't offend you in any sense, but like counseling is a kind of an artificial environment, right? You're like setting aside space and saying, okay, like you'll be heard here. Yeah. You know, you're just it's something that should happen in relationships, you know, and it should happen within the church. Yeah. But it doesn't often. Right. So like I hear that, and I think that's that'll be helpful for the listeners. But then there's also an aspect in which if somebody is struggling with it themselves, how do they invite other people into the story of their sexuality, but then also like examine their own story? Is this something somebody can do with themselves? Or how does so that giving to the people who see other people coming into their lives, but then also people who are struggling with it, what do they do with that?
Yeah. Let me get back up 1 second. I think counseling is a real relationship in very strict parameters. Again, and it's so the word real, it's a real relationship. It's a practice relationship, and it does have contours that are different from our other relationships for sure. So yeah, absolutely. So the question being, can someone do that with themselves? Yes and no. That's not very helpful. It sounds like you're. I think yes, you can. You can sit, I think, with yourself, with your story, and we need to. So I'd actually press on that a bit. It's important for us to evaluate and to think well about where we are. Like I said before, examine those things internally, externally, the ways that we've been hurt, and the ways and violated, and might I say the ways that we perpetuate that violation to ourselves as things become intolerable and we don't see a way out. And that's what we do. It's so intolerable. I have to find a way to reconcile, to decrease the level of anxiety or sadness or confusion that I feel, and it's absolutely intolerable. And so I have to find outlets of respite, and so we need to do that. So yes, we can do that by ourselves. We need to look at, evaluate, and ask ourselves: is this where I want to be? Is this where I ought to be in life and my journey? Is it working? Is it impeding the way where I am? Is it a life well lived? Again, some of those existential questions, I would encourage them to be at the forefront, not in a obsessive kind of way, but that brings up another question: what's kind of a healthy evaluation? Hopefully, we're in that process of evaluating the good and the ought. And so, but on the other hand, I say no because my own view of healing and the healing arts and the way that I see healing is it's always mediated through another person. I don't know of many, if any, examples where someone's applying a healing balm through prayer, through the laying on of hands, through anointing with oil, where someone heals themselves, whether it's just them by themselves. There's good insight that comes, and insight can be at some level healing or helpful, maybe not healing, I would say helpful, but we have the opportunity in self-reflection to change patterns, to click into a new and better way if we decide that, or things come to light. No, I can implement different habits, or at least get on track. We can do that on our own, for sure, but usually there's a external prompt in that, or we're looking at those around us and we're saying, I think what they're doing for some reason looks better or healthier, or they seem more alive than where I'm currently at. And so I want to be in step with some of that. I'll have what he's having. I'll have what she's having. And so I do think that oftentimes, even in that regard, there's an external prompt that says, I should do something different. Maybe this place that I'm in isn't normal, nor should it be normal, because there's a more excellent way. And so what are those more excellent ways? We can do that on our own. We can have resolve and turn the rudder to change course, for sure. However, to the other point, I think it's better, and I think our chances of wholeness and finding a sense of healing is done in relationship. I think our brokenness most often is done in the context of relationship. And so it's a wound in that interpersonal space, but I can be healed outside of that interpersonal space. I don't think so. I think restoration happens, again, in the context of relationship. Our healing happens in the context of relationship, because fractured relationship is the thing that most oftentimes, again, has set things crooked in us, or misaligned us to where I need to find healing in the context of relationship, because my brokenness has come out of a relational context. And so I'd hold them up together and say, use the same impetus that started your wounding, or the context of that relational. We also find healing in a relational context, not on our own, kind of meditating in our rooms. Although there are things that, again, are good, and we can make strides. So yes, and no, or yes and also, yes and really important, is that a mediating presence. It says, I see you, I love you, I hear you, and I'm walking. You're not alone. And that's a part of the crisis. I'm alone. I can't find healing from my sense of aloneness and loneliness by myself. So I don't think these deeper heart pieces, kind of in those guttural places, can be solved by ourselves, as much as we want to fall back into the bootstrap piece. I can pick myself up as the individual. The individual is all sufficient. No, I think our wounds again, I don't need to go back into it. Our wounds come in relatedness. Our healing comes in relatedness, as I think a guiding principle, kind of rule of thumb would be that, as I hold up my thumb. So I would encourage that if you're in need of healing, you can take good steps and begin on your own to implement new practices, new things, healthy ways of being, however don't stay on that track. Keep that and bring someone else into it is crucial and essential in that process. Well, that's convenient to say as a counselor. Yeah. So.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. I constantly flashing back to John's gospel and just the theme of light, and living in the light, and Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever comes to me will never walk in darkness, will have the light of life. Yeah. And then even the John 3 of Jesus being the light and then people reacting to the light. Yeah. Right. And like wanting to kill the light because their deeds were evil. Right. And so there is something terrifyingly scary about being in the light, because not only can you see other people, but you can see yourself and they can see you. I think that's where like the beauty of grace really comes in, that God sees you all the time and he loves you. Like it's safe to be in the light with him. So
this feels safe and we're under our light.
In the light, man. Yeah, dude. I like it. So that call to relationship seems it strikes me that even discipleship could be just learning how to live in the light well. That could be kind of the summary of what sanctification is, in that sense. So we're gonna come down for a second. So when it comes to, this will be helpful for our listeners. We get a lot of questions from guys about things that have exploded, their addictions that come to the forefront in their marriages, and they don't know what to do. Yeah. And like their wife doesn't know what to do. Yeah. So like there's a multifaceted question there. Yeah. But then the other aspect of it will also be like, what do you share in that healing process? Okay. How much is too much? Is there such thing as too much? And then one is like guys, like how do they love their wives in that process and like honor them like in the midst of their own sin? Like that's like they're causing them hurt while at the same time they want to be near to them. And then how do women just like what's their disposition in that? Because rightly so, you start like questioning your vows and like, did he ever love me? And like those sorts of things, you just start rolling down this huge hill, and it's just there's a long cliff at the end. There's a lot of different pieces in there if you just want to double click on whatever. And
so I think first, as you talk about sin that is brought into the light in a marriage and what that does in the marriage, I think that as we think about sin, as we try to frame that, how do we do that, and what does that look like, and what's our response, especially in that context of marriage. And I know one way that Cornelius Flanagan in the book, he talks about the vandalism of Shalom, and he uses that as a frame for sin. And
a potent phrase.
Yeah, and that plays out in this, and the question being that he puts in the book, he poses is, what are we doing in the face of Shalom? Are we a part of preserving that or disturbing Shalom? And what goes with Shalom? It's those things we've been talking about of flourishing and delight and wholeness, which is the aim. And I would hold that up as the aim in our marriages. And Paul, Romans 12, as much as it depends on us to live at peace. And that goes for our marriages, obviously, too. That as much as it depends on me, I'm aiming and taking hard strides towards peace. And so any addiction, even using, it may not be, those that are watching this, they may be using, and there's on that spectrum of kind of the escalating, where is it ended up on this end. Maybe I'm using in a quote unquote casual way, maybe daily, and then if it gets into that addiction criteria. But the question of what to do, the hope first is that there's a surrender, there's a confession, there's an openness to being in the light, to being transparent in my failure, in me breaking that which I'm called to move into, to preserve in my marriage, and called to not only preserve, but be a part of cultivating and keeping. First, we'll start with the guy, as a man, cultivating, keeping, and protecting a sense of shalom for us. And so I violated my role. I violated the purpose and one of the primary ways that I ought to relate to my wife and really to the created order in the relationships, and in that cultivating, keeping, protecting, and so on and so forth. That sense of peace and wholeness.
You're speaking as the man in that situation.
Correct. Yeah, as the man, that's my role, and we're not naive. This isn't a guy problem only in terms of pornography, for sure. So what does the restoring of peace look like? And I take aim at, and I take some issue with that idea that, and it may be true, okay, I'll give credence to that I don't share things. I've heard guys, a good handful of guys that come and confess from talking about using their pornography use, and I don't want to tell my wife and it's put on her because she can't handle it. I've done that in the past, and she overreacts. I don't want her to take it the wrong way, whatever that means. I don't like her reaction. I don't think it's grace infused or filled, her reaction. I don't need someone to tell me what I need to do. I already know that I need not be looking at pornography. And to go back to, well, that feels to me at one level, not the only level, that it perpetuates hiding. And who's the prime, apart from God? And who have you primarily offended? And who have you fractured, even though it is this trespass? Who have you trespassed against? Well, first, God. And I would say, secondly, you've been a part of bending or fracturing, not breaking at this point, that one flesh union. Your offense, your sin is against your wife. Well, I didn't mean it to be. That doesn't matter, because it's a commitment, it's a covenant of fidelity. To who? Well, it's us to God, but it's us to us. Again, in covenanting to say, we're going to do this because of that one flesh union. And so I do think that as kind of a general rule, she gets access to your life. She gets, well, she's not mature enough. You've sinned against your wife. And you're part of bending, and you've disrupted shalom. Well, I did that. I don't know that it gets to be secret. And that might be too strong, or I don't agree with that for maybe some of the reasons that I just mentioned and quoted. My rule of thumb is your wife gets access. This is a breakdown in fidelity. It's a violation of love, and she gets to know. And then it moves into, well, she's not my accountability partner, so on and so forth. I don't know. I don't like her reaction. She should be upset. She should be angry. Well, she's going to start comparing herself and get paranoid. Maybe there's a level of vigilance in her that needs to be there for your marriage. So I'm not pro going underground any more than maybe you already have. I'm not pro not confessing. And you've sinned against your wife, and to say, I'm not going to confess. I don't need to confess to her. I think a part of that healing piece is being reconciled to your wife. Well, she doesn't know. That's not, I don't understand. Part of me understands that piece, and maybe you could, if you want to tease that out, but yeah, I'm not an advocate of that, because I think what I just said, I think she gets to know. Similarly, if we put it into a different realm or different category, and I know we're talking about the male primarily, so I'll use the female in a negative example. If take I come from, my husband wouldn't understand, I came from an alcoholic family, and I sneak away into my car in the evenings, particularly when I'm feeling down and sad, and I drink. and I've been doing this for a long time. I don't think he could handle it. Or rather, he came from an alcoholic family as well, and his dad would get angry and would lash out in particular ways, and I don't want him to assume that I'm going to do that and compare me to his father, that I'm going to get angry because I'm drinking. So I don't tell him that. And I go to my group, I go to AA. Now I'm working on it, and I just don't think that he should have access to my my use, my addiction, because I can deal with this on my own. And that's the problem too. You can't deal with this on your own. Don't lie to yourself. And I think we can be amazingly self-deceptive when it comes to thinking that we can resolve our, especially if we call it an addiction. It's not, by and large, it's not going to happen. So I don't, to ask that question of the person with the objection, if the tables were turned, if it was different, your wife was doing that, why would you not get access to that information? I don't think that's I don't think that's good. So
I'm with you. Yeah, Proven Men takes, well, Proven Ministries as a whole takes that stance. I've seen like Marshall many times, director of outreach, just same as across from a guy, and he confesses his stuff, says he needs to get in a group, and then Marshall's like, hey, we'll get you in a group, but tonight you can talk to your wife. You can talk to your wife, and then you call me. And then you can call me tonight. You can call me tonight. And we are there through the whole process. Tonight you talk to your wife. He's just really, he's forceful about it. Good.
I don't think I answered all your questions. That was one part of the question, but
so I'll move the ball down the conversational court. So how would you counsel wives trying to figure out how to process this? And then I guess then the next step would be then how to love their husbands in the midst of this. I mean, as well as themselves. So.
Yeah, I would like to put up a block in their hearts that might be presumptuous, that just to kind of put it out here. Oftentimes it turns into, when hearing that, it's, I'm not enough. I'm not enough for you being my husband. And so you feel like, for some reason, you feel the need to go elsewhere. And there are oftentimes it doesn't have to do with her in that way, that her being enough or doing more or having to be something other than what she is. I would just say that as an encouragement, that it's not internalizing it as my fault. It's not your fault that he's going elsewhere, looking at that woman in that way, or other folks in that sexual manner. So I would advise that, and I do think it's not clean. I would say that if there's anger that comes up, there's of course disappointment, that hopefully between partners that there's space for that to be laid out and vented, because what I said before, I feel violated. Perhaps I don't know if that language is language that they would want to use, or I feel I'm very disappointed, or I'm disappointed, again, whatever that is, that there's space to where I'm not set up to continue to resent you. And there's some resentment in this, because depending on the situation, how long this has been going on, or so forth, there's hundreds of factors, right, that play into reactions and what I feel about this in that moment. But my hope is that there would be that space, that the husband doesn't shut it down or doesn't say, well, I thought you'd be more understanding. I think if grace can be extended, it's she doesn't understand, or trying to get to kind of a root with the partner of why is this, and taking that on, I would say isn't helpful. So how to be a part of a potential solution? I think, that exposure, I think there needs to be access, that the wife has access to these pockets that have been secretive and in darkness, that fester and it's starting to, we see it coming into the house now. There's mold growing under things that I didn't notice. Yeah, exactly. And she gets access, and she, as your partner, is a part of cleaning that up. How? I think going back to some of those counseling pieces, that what precipitated this antecedents to me using are varied, and I may be aware of them, I may not be aware of them, but a space to be able to look at those roots. Where did this begin to grow? What was the soil that this was cultivated in, and as a place that I go in times of when I'm tired, when I'm bored, when I'm stressed, when I'm anxious, to fill something. That it's important that that's looked at. I mean, even as a part of this doesn't fall into oftentimes, I mean, you all are doing a discipleship category. How are we discipled in sexual wholeness? That's something that oftentimes isn't there. It might be an ancillary piece to that, but I think explicitly, I don't see that. And so that calls to a need for, if you want to call it that, if you want to call it something different, I think outside help is warranted. Outside accountability is warranted at that point. And I think, grace, that initial piece, disappointment, all those feelings, absolutely. And then a grace for the process. Sometimes we have a notion that once it's addressed, once it's brought out into the light, once there's been a call to accountability or a call to do it differently, and remorse and guilt, which are real, that now we're good. We're on the path and there's no deviation. That here's the new trajectory, and you've committed to me as your wife, you've committed to, or vice versa. I'm doing this better and looking to sustain for the sake of our marriage, etc. And so that's locked in, right? No. So that's the other thing I would say, that it's important that there's room for relapse in a process while looking at the things that have led up to that. And there's so much that goes into that we don't have time to get into. Those factors that, again, are part of the why. The why do I go here? And that's not going to clear up if it's a year, 2, 5, 10. That's a trajectory that's not going to be altered overnight. It can be. I believe in the miraculous. I believe that the gospel changes hearts, and we can live out newness of life, and we can put to death things, absolutely. And that's Romans 6. Paul, in light of our baptism, calls us to walk out resurrection life because we put to death these works. Yes. In counseling, that's a process. Things don't die easy, and the process is strangling them out, and hopefully the spouse has a hand. That's a part of the strangling, and they have all hands on deck to see this thing weeded out and taken out. It's a little bit of the process. I think outside help is needed, outside accountability. What you all are doing, getting plugged into a group where there's other men who there's solidarity and there's seeking and pursuing the same transparency and the same process. I need people in my process to find the sense of wholeness, and I'm going to stumble along the way, and hopefully there's understanding in that from my partner. Not disappointment. There should be disappointment. And we should have hearts that want justice, and when good things don't happen align with what we hope for, there's disappointment there. And we feel like there's been an injustice done in our marriage, and that's true. This isn't the way it should be. My husband, wife shouldn't look elsewhere for their intimacy needs to be met at some level, absolutely. But we need outside help, we need accountability, we need solidarity, we need to be seen and heard, and we need both truth, and we need love. We need someone who's going to kick us in the butt, and we need someone who's going to love us and be tender and grace-filled. So someone that can embody the gospel with us as we struggle but pursue, and the pursuit of holiness is essential. And sometimes we lack those that look to embody well the cruciform life and look to help us bend our own lives into cruciformity. So that's shame on us as Christians. But I think that's a part of patience. And then on the other hand, I think what if it continues? I don't want to get into this, but I do think it's not a biblical category, but I do think separation with the point of restoration is an important category. That you're not changing, you continue to, and I see wives caught in, I'm working on it, but there's no teeth to catalyze moving into making sure that this is uprooted, and it just continues to go on, and it's the wife feels like they're helpless. I'm praying. I've talked to people about it. They're in counseling. They're talking to me about counseling some, or someone's getting their report. However, it's an on years and years and years, and it's gone from maybe acute use to it's downgraded. However, it's still
sporadic use.
Yeah,
Still alive though.
It's still alive and well. And so I think we have to ask too, in the face of this sexual sin, what is warranted as a spouse, and I would have that as a part of the arsenal and the tool bag. That again, this is an ongoing and consistent violation of the one flesh union. There has to. How do we turn up the heat and make it uncomfortable, because we change when we're uncomfortable. I don't want to sit here because it's uncomfortable. Let me go over here, and so I think that's wives, husbands. This is. I'm not going to be. My heart has been violated again and again and again and again. Again, upholding fidelity and restoration, and that's a tool used for the purposes of love, restoration, and fidelity. That tool being perhaps a separation. Again, I realize that's not a biblical category of separation, but step back. You need your own space, your own time to get well. And I'm, because of my tiredness, there's grace there, because of my hurt, I need to eject for a season with the hopes that this again is suppressed or put to death, the way where I can feel a sense of safety for my own heart and life with you. Yeah.
Heavy.
Yeah.
It strikes me that it's such a vulnerable experience for both people, and both of them as one, but then, I mean, they're two people practicing oneness, being oneness.
Yeah.
The practice of just bravery.
Right.
I just imagine is huge. Obviously I'm not married, but like the man to like, I was like, I've been doing things cowardly, right? And like the wanting to maintain that disposition of hiding, but then all of a sudden taking those steps towards just being brave and being seen, and then going to the wife. And then like in other moments, then for the wife on that other end is like, oh my gosh, I don't want other people to see this, right? And so then like having the courage to let her husband step in the light, and knowing that it's a mirror, that she'll be seen too.
Sure.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It was a big process.
Yeah.
The call is there, and the light is safe, and I do think it just starts with them learning how to be real with each other and letting them be seen by others as well. Yeah. It's a part of that healing. So I'm with you.
To that point too, and we've talked about this on outside of here, that we serve the crucified King, who is hung as he's also the naked King. And the irony or the paradox in that is, as we gaze upon his own nakedness on our behalf, we look down and notice our own nakedness that he atoned for. And so stepping to that, as I talk about a cruciform life, that as we step into that line of sight to see the naked King, that too lays us bare all the more to show us that we need him,
Isn't he awesome?
Yeah.
He that he would be willing to be naked first.
Yeah, exactly.
How incredible is that? It's like, I will hang naked on a cross for all the world to see for all of eternity. Right. They can always look back and see me naked. And so just, Shane, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay. Come be with me. Right. And I will clothe you. Right. I'll clothe you. But I did it first. Yeah. They looked at my filth first. Yeah. Right? Yeah. They hung me on a cross for it. I won't hang you on a cross for it. All you have to do is just let me see. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, naked and bled first. And I do think for the husband to love his bride as Christ loved the church,
but that means we follow suit in our vulnerability or nakedness first, and bleeding first on our bride's behalf. I think that call is ought to be potent in our own hearts and lives, because of our suffering Savior who did that on our behalf first. For his bride, do we not also approach our bride to do the same? So yeah.
So we stepped into something, we're already there just as far as conversation goes. What are we aiming for? Just that question of like, we looked at kind of culture and distorted sexuality. We looked at kind of the application then of like engaging that ugliness in the midst of marriage, but then also like I think a lot of those things apply to singleness just as easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Add those resources specifically. Then like what are we aiming for? When I was young, I was in middle school, and a girl that I was very close with, she got sexually abused, and it just messed me up. I was really, really angry for a long time. That was surrounded by some family members passing away, so I stopped liking stopped liking God because of those moments, and I didn't stop believing he existed. I just stopped liking him.
Yeah.
In my middle school kind of scheme of the world, I would have articulated that the point of life is happiness. And so I looked at the world. I said, hey, what will make me happy? So they gave me a list of things, one of them being, the hookup culture. Yeah. And so engage that through high school. But then it's good. I mean, just having to re-ask myself that question once I met Jesus. What do I want? It's the single greatest utterance of Jesus. And I think at the end of the day, people really actually just want to be known. Yeah. I think people will actually go through lament for the sake of being known, which then kicks the happiness piece to the curb, because then like people aren't actually aiming for happiness in those moments because they realize that being known is more important. And I see secular world practice this. I see Christians practice this. Like it's not. I think it's just true to our humanity that we want to be known. Yeah. I had read something recently. It's a quote, and this isn't verbatim, but the idea was that our cultural obsession with sex is really just a cultural call to be known. It's almost a cry to heaven, in that sense. But it's perverted, it's warped in. So we're facing each other. Know me, know me, know me. Yeah, right. And so we practice that prolifically. So what are we aiming for? Obviously, we've looked at the cross. Yeah. I don't know if like Genesis or Revelation, bookending that event there in the middle, which direction you'd want to go, or using some other frame of reference. But when a lot of single guys, a lot of married people, like what is the ideal? What are we hoping for
in our marriages, in
our life, sexuality? Like what? So like I'm a single guy. Yeah. But obviously I have a libido. Right. So how? Like what am I aiming for? Yeah. Good. Like am I aiming for marriage? Is that because I see other guys, they think that's in it, and then they get married, and they just bring their trash into marriage. But then people who are married is like, is this the end? Like what are we doing now? So like kind of the telos, if you will, the end, the picture. Yeah.
Well, as you talk about what are the things that we're made for, and that's where things go bad for us, is when those needs aren't met. So we're left with deprivations, and we try to fill those. And so I think some of those, you mentioned, just in terms of need, I need to be seen. I need to be loved. I need someone who delights in me, sees me, and not just sees me, but sees me in my dignity and speaks to my dignity. I see you, you're valued, and I love you.
Even in the midst of this.
Yeah, I know you, and I still love you, as you said that earlier. Those are some basic, even in attachment, those are the things that we, at our core, from our very earliest days, need. And if we don't get those things, if we don't feel seen, if we don't feel loved, if we don't feel valued, cherished, and delighted in our development, we're going to be stunted. We're going to be hurt. And it's even as our hearts develop and our internal worlds, we're set up for that not to go well in terms of our development. And so sex in many ways can be, if done right, is all of those encapsulated in a very potent and particular way, because you're totally seen, hopefully the way it's supposed to. You're delighted in, you're valued, your dignity can be affirmed, and you are attached. And so if you're single, and you can't have sex yet because there's a context for sex biblically within the context and confines of marriage. The good news is you can still get those things met. Those things that we need on that most fundamental level from hopefully from Jesus' body, that you can, by those around you, that Lord willing, we have people in our lives that deeply and profoundly love us well, that see us, that value us, that cherish us, and speak to the dignity that they see in us. We desperately need that, and our lives are structured around getting that. And then we get crazy when we don't have it. And that's where I think so much of our dysfunction is, because I don't feel, sense, and have that. That's the part that I go back to, that it feels intolerable. And so I develop a sense of shame. I feel like I doubt what I have to offer. I doubt my identity. I doubt so many things, and I'm susceptible in those places because I so desperately need, obviously, what I've been made and I'm supposed to get. So any single person needs those things just like a married person does. And just because you're married and having sex doesn't mean that all those needs are met. That's a pipe dream too. Because you're having sex doesn't mean those needs are met. But again, that's a potent picture of those things potentially coming about. So I would say seek those things in Jesus and in Jesus's body and those around you, and having conversations about, we have a need problem. I'm convinced of that we don't like stating our needs. And so instead, this is a mean thing to say, we manipulate and put on false selves to get people, to wrangle them into giving us that, rather than being upfront and honest that, hey, I have this need to be seen. Do you? I know you do. But yeah, I do. Well, how do we walk that out with each other? How do I speak to your dignity and value those things, rather than opening up pockets of shame where there's areas I should be valued in, I'm not, and so I have a profound sense that something's wrong with me, because rather than delight, you've given me distaste or pointed out that those things aren't to be valued. And so am I not to be valued? How are we doing valuing each other, ennobling relationships in our lives that we speak to our dignity? And if we don't have that, then we're gonna be starved. And so that's the good creation. We had that, and that was the vandalizing of Shalom came because we looked to get wisdom, and we consumed elsewhere other than the living God, and we fractured that relationship. And so, I think restoring and reclaiming, we can do that, both in Jesus and in those around us. And so it's out there. We can have that, but I'm not under any illusion that that's not an uphill battle, particularly as we value things more than those things. And our brokenness and sin gets in the way.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, it's great.
It's been awesome to have you on and just dialogue through this stuff.
Yeah.
That's huge. And the need is real.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Guys, thanks for being with us today. See you next month.
Bye.